The chamber floated in the darkness of space, a massive ring of metal and light that orbited the purple giant planet below. Inside, representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections, each area designed for their specific biological needs. Some breathed oxygen, others methane. Some needed water tanks, others electromagnetic fields. The Galactic Council had spent thousands of years perfecting this place, and they were proud of it. Hyan Wu stood at the human podium, a simple platform that rose from the floor when it was Earth's turn to speak. He wore a dark blue uniform with Earth's symbol on the shoulder, a small planet wrapped in olive branches. Around him, beings of incredible variety watched with varying degrees of interest. Most looked bored. The debate had been going on for 6 hours. The council was discussing a massive project to build quantum jump gates between the core worlds. These gates would allow instant travel across thousands of light years, connecting the most important planets in council space. It would cost enormous resources and require technology from every member species. Hyan Wu had prepared his presentation carefully. Humanity had been part of the council for 15 years, ever since the first contact with the Vrel exploration fleet. In those years, Earth had learned much, but they had also developed their own technologies, building on what they already knew. Now Hyan Wu wanted to contribute something meaningful. "Honored council members," he began. His voice translated instantly into 46 different languages and communication methods. Humanity wishes to offer our advances in fusion reactor technology and quantum computing. Our scientists have developed algorithms that can reduce jump gate calculation times by 30%. We believe this could significantly improve the efficiency of the proposed network. He activated the holographic display, showing detailed schematics and test results. The data was solid. Earth's engineers had worked for 3 years on this, refining techniques that combined human intuition with alien mathematics. A sound like breaking glass filled the chamber. It was laughter. Thexula, the Vrel representative, was laughing. The crystalline being's body flickered with colors that the translator interpreted as amusement mixed with contempt. "The humans think they have something to teach us," Thexula said, her voice like wind chimes in a storm. "Charming. Truly charming. Your species has been in space for barely a century. We have been traveling between stars for 20,000 years. Your fusion technology is based on principles we gave you. Your quantum computing uses mathematics we taught you. And now you claim to have improved upon it?" Other council members joined in with their own versions of laughter. The Mandari delegate, an insect-like creature the size of a small car, clicked his mandibles in a rhythm that meant derision. The Horthic representative, a blob of intelligent protoplasm, literally rippled with mockery. Hyan Wu felt his face grow warm, but he kept his expression neutral. "With respect, Counselor Thexula, while we learned the basics from council archives, our improvements are original Earth research. If you review the data, you'll see that our approach uses a different theoretical framework that derivative," Thexula interrupted. "Primitive, simplistic. Choose whichever word you prefer, Ambassador. The reality is that humanity is still in its infancy. You have value to the Council, certainly, but not as innovators. Not as equals." The chamber fell silent. Even those who had been laughing seemed to sense that Thexula had crossed a line. But no one spoke against her. Bormok, the council chair, leaned forward in his massive seat. The Kelzan was 3 meters tall, covered in thick gray skin like stone, with eyes that glowed a dull orange. He had led the council for 200 years, and his word was law. "Ambassador Hyan Wu," Bormok said, his voice deep and slow like an avalanche. "Your enthusiasm is noted. However, the council has reviewed humanity's capabilities and determined where you can best serve the greater good. The construction of the jump gate network will require significant manual labor. asteroid mining, material processing, hazardous environment work. These tasks require beings who are expendable if accidents occur. Haiyan Wu stared at him. Expendable? Numerous, Vorma corrected, though his tone suggested the words meant the same thing to him. Humanity has a population of 11 billion. You reproduce quickly. You adapt to harsh conditions. These are valuable traits. We assign you to mining operations in the Kelthros Belt and waste reclamation on the processing stations. Additionally, your military forces will be reassigned to border patrol duties in Sectors 17 through 23. The sectors Vormok mentioned were the most dangerous in Council space. Pirates, spatial anomalies, and hostile species made them death traps. No major species wanted to patrol them. Haiyan Wu looked around the chamber. He saw satisfaction on some faces, indifference on others. Not one species looked uncomfortable with the decision. This is not what Earth agreed to when we joined the Council, Haiyan Wu said carefully. We were told this was a partnership, that all species contribute according to their strengths and share in the benefits equally. And you will contribute according to your strengths, Vexuola said sweetly. Your strength is that there are many of you, and you are willing to take risks. We are using you appropriately. Haiyan Wu took a deep breath. He thought about the people back on Earth who believed in the Council, who thought that joining a galactic civilization meant humanity would be respected, that Earth's ideas would matter. He thought about the young scientists who had worked so hard on the fusion improvements, hoping to prove humanity's worth. Then I must inform the Council that Earth will reconsider its membership, Haiyan Wu said. The words came out steady and clear. If we are viewed as servants rather than partners, if our contributions are dismissed without review, if our people are considered expendable, then this is not an organization we wish to be part of. The chamber erupted, not with concern, but with laughter, even louder than before. The Mandari delegate clicked so hard that pieces of the floor cracked beneath his legs. The Horthic actually split into two smaller blobs from the force of his amusement. Vormok raised one massive hand, and silence fell immediately. He looked at Haiyan Wu with something that might have been pity. Ambassador, no species has ever left the Council. Do you understand what you would be choosing? No access to quantum jump gates. No access to Council trade networks. No protection from hostile forces. No sharing of technology or knowledge. Your species would be isolated, alone in a galaxy full of dangers. You would be nothing. Perhaps, Haiyan Wu said quietly, but we would be nothing on our own terms, with our dignity intact. Vormak waved his hand dismissively. Return to Earth, Ambassador. Discuss this with your leaders. When you realize the foolishness of this threat, we will still be here. The Council is patient. We will wait for your inevitable return and apology. Haiyan Wu bowed formally, not out of respect, but out of habit. Then he turned and walked out of the chamber. Behind him, the Council resumed their discussions, already forgetting about the human problem. After all, where could they possibly go? What could they possibly do without the Council's help? 3 months later, they would begin to understand their mistake. But by then, it would be far too late. That the message arrived at Council headquarters exactly 90 days after Haiyan Wu's departure. It was brief, formal, and absolutely clear. The United Earth Government, representing all nations and territories of humanity, was exercising its right to withdraw from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. Within hours, human personnel began evacuating from Council facilities across known space. Research scientists packed up their equipment. From the quantum laboratory on station. 6. Diplomatic staff closed the Earth Embassy on Zenthari. Prime. Military officers recalled their troops from border patrol assignments. Trade representatives terminated every contract, every agreement. Every arrangement that bound Earth to Council authority. It happened so smoothly that many Council members initially thought it was a technical error. Surely the humans hadn't actually meant to leave. This had to be some kind of administrative mistake. Vormok didn't believe it was a mistake, but he also didn't believe it would last. He sent 3 senior ambassadors to Earth, beings of great importance who had negotiated treaties for centuries. They arrived at Earth's orbital station expecting to be welcomed with relief and gratitude. Instead, they were met by President G1, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that showed no fear. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. Ko-1 listened politely to their offers, their warnings, their predictions of disaster. Then she stood up, thanked them for their time, and showed them to their ship. The ambassadors left stunned, reporting back to Vormok that the humans seemed to have lost their minds. 2 weeks later, G1 gave a speech that was broadcast across every communication network humanity could reach, including several channels that leaked into Council space. She stood in front of the United Earth Assembly, with representatives from every nation behind her, and spoke in a voice that never wavered. 15 years ago, we joined the Galactic Council with hope and excitement. We believed we were joining a community of equals, where every species contributed their unique strengths and perspectives. We were wrong. The Council does not want partners. They want servants. They want beings who will do the dangerous work, take the deadly risks, and ask for nothing in return except the privilege of being looked down upon. She paused, letting her words sink in. Humanity rejects this. We will not mine asteroids so that others can build wonders we are not allowed to help design. We will not die on border patrols, protecting those who consider us expendable. We will not beg for respect that should be freely given. From this day forward, Earth walks its own path among the stars. The speech ended with a declaration that made Council analysts sit up and take notice. Earth was not retreating into isolation. Instead, humanity was offering partnerships to any species, whether Council members or not, who believed in mutual respect and fair dealing. The terms were simple: equal exchange, honest communication, and no species treated as inferior to another. Within a month, 5 non-aligned species had responded positively. They were small civilizations, limited in resources, existing on the edges of Council space, where the powerful empires rarely bothered to look. The Council barely knew their names, but they knew the Council's arrogance well, having experienced it themselves. The Council responded with sanctions. Any species that traded with humanity would face economic penalties. Any world that harbored human colonies would lose access to Council jump gates. Any civilization that chose Earth over the Council would be considered hostile. Most species complied immediately. The Council was too powerful, too entrenched, too necessary for survival. But a few continued secret dealings with human merchants, hiding the transactions beneath layers of false documentation. The Council noticed, but considered it insignificant. A few smugglers and rebels didn't matter. On Earth itself, the withdrawal sparked the largest engineering project in human history. Tae-Soon, an engineer who had spent 10 years studying Council propulsion systems, led the design of Earth's first independent colony ships. But these would not be copies of Council technology. They would be something new. We've been thinking about this wrong, Tae-Soon explained to his team of 2,000 engineers and scientists. We've been trying to match what the Council does. Instead, we should focus on what humans do best. We adapt. We improvise. We find solutions that nobody else would consider. The result was a fusion drive that used principles the Council had dismissed as inefficient. It was inefficient by their standards, requiring more fuel and more maintenance. But it was also simpler to build, easier to repair, and surprisingly faster in certain conditions. Where Council ships needed massive infrastructure and rare materials, Human ships could be constructed in orbital factories using resources from Earth's own asteroid belt. A physicist who had published papers that Council scientists called interesting but impractical, developed improvements to the fusion reactors that powered these ships. She found ways to extract more energy from the same reactions, making human vessels capable of longer journeys without refueling. The Council had never pursued this research because they had so many refueling stations. Humanity had none, so they had to be creative. Jae-Hyon, a programmer who had once been rejected from a Council research position for being too unconventional, created navigation AI systems that operated independently of the Council's quantum network. This network was the backbone of galactic navigation, allowing ships to calculate safe routes through the chaos of hyperspace. Being cut off from it should have crippled human space travel. Instead, Jae-Hyun's AI learned to chart paths using human mathematical models combined with alien concepts that the Council considered obsolete. The system was slower at first, taking hours to calculate routes that the Council network computed in seconds. But it improved rapidly, and more importantly, it belonged entirely to humanity. No one could shut it down or restrict access. The first colony ship launched 3 years after the withdrawal. It was not elegant like Council vessels, with their graceful curves and shimmering fields. It was blocky, practical, covered in maintenance hatches and external equipment. Council observers who detected it on their sensors laughed at the primitive design. The ship traveled for 6 months before reaching a world on the outer edge of explored space. The planet was cold, with a thin atmosphere and frequent volcanic activity. Council surveys had marked it as marginal for colonization, suitable only for temporary mining operations. The human colonists looked at the data and saw opportunity. Within a year, the colony had grown to 5,000 people. Within 5 years, 30,000. The planet's volcanic activity provided geothermal energy. The thin atmosphere was gradually enriched using biological processors designed by human terraformers. The cold was manageable with proper insulation and heating systems. More colonies followed. 10 ships, then 50, then hundreds. Humanity spread across space like seeds in the wind, finding places that other species had overlooked or abandoned. They turned frozen moons into farms using underground greenhouses. They built cities in asteroid belts where the Council saw only worthless rock. They established trade posts in empty systems that became meeting places for independent merchants. Council watched all of this with amusement. Let the humans play at being independent. Let them struggle on marginal worlds with inferior technology. Eventually, they would come crawling back, begging to be readmitted. Eventually, they would learn that you cannot survive in the galaxy without the Council's protection and resources. 50 years passed. The Council stopped paying attention to humanity. They had more important concerns, more pressing matters. The humans had become irrelevant, a footnote in galactic history, a lesson in the dangers of pride. They could not have been more wrong. Dae-Jung had been hauling freight through neutral space for 20 years, and he thought he had seen everything. His ship, the Morning Star, was old but reliable, carrying goods between independent worlds that didn't want to deal with Council regulations. It was honest work, if lonely, and it paid well enough. He was passing through the outer reaches, a region of space so distant from Council worlds that most maps didn't bother marking it in detail. When his sensors picked up something strange, a massive energy signature, far too large and complex to be a natural phenomenon. Curious, he adjusted course to investigate. What he found made him forget to breathe for almost a minute. A city floated in space, a construct of metal and light that stretched for dozens of kilometers. But this wasn't built around a planet or moon. It was free-floating, a complete artificial environment that housed what his sensors estimated to be 500,000 life forms. The architecture was unlike anything the Council built, more practical and modular, designed for expansion and adaptation. The signature read as human. Bae-yung sent a standard greeting signal, half expecting to be ignored or turned away. Instead, he received an immediate response, welcoming him to Haven Station, offering docking privileges and trade opportunities. The voice on the other end spoke with a slight accent he couldn't quite place, but was definitely human. He docked, still not quite believing what he was seeing. The station was pristine, well-maintained, humming with activity. Humans walked the corridors alongside beings from species Dae-Young, recognized as Council outcasts, minor civilizations that had been pushed to the margins or never invited to join at all. Everyone seemed busy, purposeful, and notably absent of the hierarchical tensions he saw in Council space. A young woman met him at the dock. She introduced herself as Hei-1, Station Coordinator for Merchant Relations. She was professional, efficient, and treated him with a respect he rarely received in Council ports, where humans were still remembered as the species that foolishly left. "We don't get many independent traders from Council space," Hei-1 said as she led him through the station. "Most are afraid of the sanctions. But you're welcome here. We have goods you might find interesting, and we always need what traders bring from the core regions." Dae-Young looked around at the technology on display. The lighting was brighter and more efficient than Council standard. The air felt cleaner. The gravity felt natural, not the slightly wrong sensation of Council gravity generators. Everything worked, and worked well. "How did you build this?" he asked finally. "The Council said humanity would collapse without their support. They said you'd be lucky to survive on a handful of colony worlds." Hei-1 smiled. "The Council said a lot of things. They were wrong about most of them. We have over 300 colonies now, spread across 16 sectors. Haven Station is just one of 47 major orbital facilities. We've been building for 50 years, Ambassador Dae-Young, without the Council's help or approval." "I'm not an ambassador," he corrected automatically. "Just a freight hauler. You're from Council space, and you've come here peacefully. That makes you an ambassador in my book." She gestured to a viewport that showed the planet below. It was beautiful, covered in blue oceans and green continents, with white clouds swirling in complex patterns. "That's New Sol. 50 million people." The Council's survey marked it as uninhabitable because of the aggressive microbial life. "Our biologists found ways to work with the microbes instead of against them. Now they're part of our terraforming system." Dae-Young spent 3 days at Haven Station. What he learned shocked him more with each passing hour. Human technology had not just caught up with the Council. In many areas, it had surpassed it. Their medical science could cure diseases the Council considered terminal. A doctor named Minna showed him a regeneration chamber that could regrow entire limbs in weeks, using techniques that the Council had theorized but never successfully implemented. Their manufacturing was more efficient, using automated systems, combined with human oversight in ways that produced higher quality goods at lower costs. Their military technology was perhaps most impressive. Dae-Young met Admiral Su-Jin, a woman in her 50s who commanded humanity's defense fleet. She didn't share classified information, but what she did show him was remarkable. Human warships used a new type of shielding that adapted to different weapons. Quantum slipstream drives that made them faster than anything the Council flew. And electronic warfare capabilities that could shut down enemy systems without firing a shot. "We learned something important when we left the Council," Su-Jin explained. "Necessity drives innovation. The Council has had the same technology for thousands of years because they never needed to improve. They were comfortable, complacent. We couldn't afford to be either. Every advance we made was born from need, refined through trial and error, perfected because failure meant extinction. But the technology wasn't the most impressive part. It was the society itself. De Jong watched humans work alongside 23 different species, none of them council members. They had formed what they called the Independent Coalition, an alliance based on mutual respect and fair trade. There were no superior species, no inferior ones. Everyone contributed what they could, and everyone benefited equally. A young programmer named Yoon Ah explained it to him over dinner in one of the station's restaurants. The council operates on hierarchy. Someone is always on top, someone is always on the bottom. We built something different. Yes, humans started this, but it's not a human empire. It's a genuine partnership. When the Trell joined us, they brought agricultural techniques we'd never considered. When the Barathi came, they shared metallurgy that revolutionized our ship construction. We all make each other stronger. Dae-Jung left Haven Station with his cargo, holds full of goods that would sell for premium prices in council space. He also left with something more valuable, information. The council needed to know about this. They needed to understand what humanity had become. He wasn't the only one gathering information. The council had finally noticed the whispers, the rumors, the reports of human colonies in impossible places. They had sent their own reconnaissance mission, led by the Xula herself. She had been the one to mock humanity 50 years ago, and now she would be the one to discover what had become of them. Her ship entered human space quietly, using stealth technology that should have made them invisible. It didn't. Human sensors, developed specifically to counter Council stealth systems, detected them within hours. But rather than attacking or turning them away, the humans simply watched. The Xula spent 3 months observing human colonies, documenting their technology, analyzing their society. She visited worlds that should have been empty and found thriving civilizations. She watched construction that should have been impossible being completed by human engineers and their allies. She measured energy outputs that exceeded Council standards and confirmed they were real, not sensor errors. When she returned to Council space, she brought data that the Council didn't want to believe. Humanity had not just survived. They had flourished. They had built an alternative to the Council's model, and it was working better than anyone had imagined possible. The Council chamber was silent as Vexula presented her findings. Vormok, now ancient and frail but still in power, stared at the holographic displays showing human cities, human technology, human success. Around the chamber, other species watched with varying expressions. Some looked impressed. Others looked worried. A few looked terrified. "This is impossible," Vormok said finally. "They were nothing. We gave them everything they had. How could they have advanced so far without us?" Vexula's crystalline body flickered with colors that indicated deep thought. Perhaps we didn't give them everything. Perhaps they had more than we recognized. Perhaps we were wrong. The admission hung in the air. The Council had been wrong. About humanity's capabilities. About their potential. About what would happen if they left. And now, 50 years later, they faced not a group of struggling refugees begging to return, but a powerful civilization that had no need of them at all. Worse, the Independent Coalition was growing. More species were joining, attracted by the promise of equality and mutual respect. Council trade revenues had declined by 30% as merchants found better deals in Coalition space. Some Council members were quietly questioning whether their civilization was truly superior or just older. The Council was no longer the only power in the galaxy, and they had no idea what to do about it. The attack came without warning. One moment, the eastern frontier of Council space was quiet, peaceful, patrolled by routine defense fleets that hadn't seen real combat in decades. The next moment, 12 worlds went silent simultaneously, their communication networks cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. The Vorik swarm had arrived. Nobody knew where they came from. Some theorized they had been drifting through the void between galaxies for millennia, finally reaching inhabited space by accident. Others believed they had always been there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they were here, and they were unstoppable. The Vorak were unlike anything the Council had encountered. They weren't organic in the traditional sense, but silicon-based life forms that existed in a collective hive mind. Each unit was roughly the size of a large dog, made of crystalline structures that could reconfigure themselves for different purposes. They could survive in vacuum, withstand extreme temperatures, and absorb both biological matter and technology, incorporating it into their collective knowledge. They didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, didn't show any interest in coexistence. They simply consumed. They landed on a world, broke down everything they found into its component elements, absorbed what was useful, and moved on to the next target. Behind them, they left nothing but barren rock. The Council mobilized its fleets immediately. Vormok, despite his age and failing health, took personal command of the defense. Thousands of ships converged on the eastern frontier, the largest military deployment in Council history. They were confident. The Council had thousands of years of military experience, advanced weapons, numerical superiority. The Vorak were just mindless drones. How dangerous could they be? The first battle provided the answer. Devastating. Council ships approached the Vorak vessels using standard tactical formations that had worked for centuries. The Vorak ignored the formations entirely. Their ships moved in patterns that seemed random, but proved devastatingly effective. They attacked from impossible angles, coordinated with perfect precision, and adapted to every weapon the Council used within minutes of first exposure. When Council ships fired plasma cannons, the Vorak shields absorbed the energy and used it to power their own weapons. When they launched missiles, the Vorak intercepted them or reprogrammed them mid-flight. When they tried electronic warfare, the Vorak hive mind simply shrugged off the attacks and countered with viruses that shut down entire battle groups in 6 hours of fighting. The Council lost 40% of its eastern fleet. The survivors retreated in chaos, many ships damaged beyond repair. The Vorak continued their advance, consuming 4 more worlds before the week ended. Panic spread through Council space. Military analysts ran simulations and came back with terrifying conclusions. At the current rate of advance, the Vorak would reach the core worlds within a year. Nothing the Council had seemed capable of stopping them. They were too adaptable, too coordinated, too efficient. Vormok called emergency sessions, demanding solutions. The military proposed throwing more ships at the problem, overwhelming the Vorak with sheer numbers. But each battle only taught the Vorak more about Council tactics and technology. They were learning faster than the Council could adapt. The Science Council proposed using quantum destabilizers, weapons that could collapse entire star systems, destroying the Vorak forces along with any planets they had occupied. But those planets still had Council citizens on them, billions of beings who had been unable to evacuate before the Vorak arrived. Using the destabilizers would mean murdering their own people to stop the threat. Vexula sat in one of these emergency sessions, listening to the increasingly desperate proposals, and thought about humanity. She remembered visiting their space, seeing their technology, witnessing their capabilities. She remembered how their ships moved, how their systems worked, how different their approach was from everything the Council did. She stood up, interrupting a heated argument about acceptable casualty rates. "We need to ask humanity for help." The chamber fell silent. Then it erupted in outrage. Ask humanity? The species they had dismissed? The ones they had laughed at when they left? The civilization that had abandoned the Council? "They are not our friends," one delegate shouted. "They rejected us." They built their coalition specifically to oppose us. Why would they help? Because they're better than we are, Vixula said quietly. The words hurt to speak, but they were true. We treated them as inferiors, as servants, as expendable. When they offered to help us, we mocked them. When they left, we celebrated. And they succeeded despite us, not because of us. They have no reason to help, but they might do it anyway, because that's what they do. They protect those who need protection, even those who don't deserve it. The debate raged for hours. Many refused to even consider the idea, but the reports from the front kept getting worse. More worlds lost. More fleets destroyed. The Vorak were adapting faster than anyone had predicted, and they were heading toward the most populated regions of Council space. Finally, Vormok made his decision. He would not ask humanity for help. That would be too humiliating, too much of an admission of failure. But he would authorize Vexula to open communication channels, to see if perhaps humanity had information that might be useful, to potentially explore the possibility of temporary cooperation in the face of a mutual threat. Not it was a politician's answer, carefully worded to avoid sounding like a plea for help, even though that's exactly what it was. Vexula didn't waste time with the diplomatic games. She sent a direct message to Earth, simple and honest. The Council was facing extinction. Billions would die. Could humanity help? The response came within hours, but not from Earth's diplomatic corps. It came from Admiral Su Jin herself. The message was brief and contained a data package showing detailed analysis of the Vorak threat. The humans had been monitoring the situation. They knew exactly what was happening, how bad it was, and what the Council was facing. Admiral Su Jin's message said something that made Vexula's crystalline form flicker with shame. The humans had been preparing for this possibility from the moment they detected the Vorak, not preparing to defend themselves, but preparing to help the Council if needed. Despite everything that had happened between them, humanity had never stopped watching over the galaxy, protecting those who needed protection. But the decision of whether to actually intervene wasn't the Admiral's to make. That decision belonged to Earth's president, a man named Dong Hyen, who had taken office just 2 years earlier. He called an emergency session of the United Earth Assembly, bringing together representatives from every human colony, every coalition species, every voice that had a stake in the decision. The debate was intense. Many argued that the Council had earned their fate. They had been arrogant, cruel, dismissive. They had treated humanity as servants and laughed when Earth left. Why should humans risk their lives to save people who would probably go back to looking down on them the moment the crisis passed? Others pointed out that the Vorak wouldn't stop with Council space. If they consumed the Council worlds, they would continue spreading, eventually reaching coalition territory. This was everyone's problem, not just the Council's, but the argument that won the day came from Dong Hyen himself. He stood before the assembly and spoke about what it meant to be human, to be better not because it was easy or profitable, but because it was right, to help not because someone deserved it, but because they needed it, to show mercy not to gain something in return, but because mercy itself had value. The Council treated us poorly, Dong Hyen said. They were wrong to do so, but their civilians, their children, their innocent people don't deserve to die because their leaders were arrogant. We are better than that. We have to be better than that, or what's the point of everything we've built? The vote was close, but it passed. Humanity would help. Admiral Su Jin received authorization to deploy a task force to the eastern frontier. Not the full coalition fleet, but enough to make a difference. Enough to show the Council what humanity had become. Dong Hyen sent a personal message to Vormok. It contained no demands, no conditions, no lists of requirements for help. It simply said, "We remember the indignity you showed us. But we are not you. Humanity will help, not because you deserve it, but because innocents deserve protection. Admiral Su Jin's fleet began moving immediately. 30 ships, small compared to the massive Council armadas, but equipped with technology that the Council had never seen and tactics they had never imagined. They jumped into hyperspace, heading for the war zone, ready to face an enemy that had destroyed everything the Council threw at it. The Council watched them come, and felt something they hadn't felt in thousands of years. Hope mixed with shame, wondering if perhaps they had been wrong about humanity from the very beginning. The Council defense line was collapsing. 3 more worlds had fallen in the past week, and the Vorak advance showed no signs of slowing. The remaining Council fleets had retreated to a defensive position around a cluster of heavily populated systems, preparing for what many believed would be their last stand. Admiral Su Jin's task force arrived in the middle of this chaos. 30 ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the defensive perimeter, their arrival detected immediately by Council sensors. Their response was a mixture of relief and confusion. Relief that someone had come to help. Confusion about what 30 ships could possibly accomplish against a threat that had destroyed thousands. The Council fleet commander, a Kelzan general named Thomric, opened a communication channel to the human flagship. He tried to be diplomatic, but his doubt was obvious in every word. 30 ships. The Council appreciated the gesture, truly, but perhaps the humans didn't understand the scale of the threat they were facing. Su Jin's response was polite but firm. She understood perfectly. She had been analyzing Vorak tactics for months, running simulations, developing strategies. She knew exactly what she was doing. With the Council's permission, she would take her task force to the front line and engage the enemy directly. Thomric wanted to argue, to explain that courage wasn't enough against the Vorak, that good intentions wouldn't stop them from being consumed. But he also had no better options. If the humans wanted to sacrifice themselves, who was he to stop them? He gave permission, fully expecting to watch 30 human ships die in the next few hours. The human task force moved forward, approaching the Vorak advance at speeds that made Council sensors recalculate multiple times. Human quantum slipstream drives allowed them to accelerate and maneuver in ways that Council ships couldn't match. They didn't form traditional battle lines or defensive positions. Instead, they spread out across a wide area, each ship operating independently but clearly. Coordinated. The Vorak detected them and responded with the same tactics that had destroyed every Council fleet. Hundreds of Vorak vessels converged on the human positions, moving in their characteristic unpredictable patterns, preparing to overwhelm and consume. Then something happened that nobody expected. The human ships simply weren't there anymore. They had moved faster than the Vorak anticipated, appearing at different positions across the battlefield. When the Vorak adjusted and converged again, the humans moved again, staying just ahead of the swarm. Never quite in reach. Council observers watched in amazement as the human ships danced through the battle space, testing the Vorak responses, gathering data, learning their patterns. Su Jin was conducting reconnaissance, studying her enemy before committing to serious engagement. The Vorak, for the first time since their arrival, seemed confused. Their hive mind was accustomed to enemies that fought predictably, that stayed in one place and tried to hold positions. The humans refused to be predictable. They appeared, fired, and vanished before the Vorak could respond effectively. After 3 hours of this, Su Jin gave the order to engage fully. The human ships stopped running and started fighting for real. What the Council witnessed next would be studied in military academies for generations. Human plasma lances, refined far beyond Council versions, cut through Vorak shields like they weren't there. The Vorak adapted quickly, reinforcing their defenses. But then the humans switched to graviton disruptors that bypassed shields entirely, and crushed Vorak vessels from the inside out. When the Vorak adapted to that, the humans had already moved on to electromagnetic pulse weapons that shut down entire clusters of enemy ships. But the most devastating weapon wasn't physical at all. Yuna, the programmer who had once explained coalition philosophy over dinner, was leading a team of specialists in electronic warfare. While the physical ships fought, she was conducting an invisible battle inside the Vorak hive mind network. The Vorak's strength was their coordination, the way thousands of units acted as one. Yuna found the communication protocols they used and introduced carefully crafted code that created tiny errors in their calculations. At first, these errors were so small that the Vorak didn't notice. One ship would be a fraction of a second late responding to a command. Another would move a few meters off its intended position, but those small errors cascaded. Ships started colliding with each other. Commands got confused. The perfect coordination that made the Vorak so deadly began to fail. They tried to purge the virus, but Yuna's code was adaptive, changing faster than they could respond. Within hours, the Vorak swarm was fighting itself as much as it was fighting the humans. The battle lasted 3 days. At the end, the Vorak advance had been stopped for the first time since they arrived. 60% of their forces in that sector had been destroyed or disabled. The rest had retreated, pulling back to regroup and adapt to these new tactics. Council military analysts couldn't believe what they were seeing. 30 human ships had accomplished what thousands of Council vessels could not. The casualties told the story clearly. The humans had lost 3 ships and suffered moderate damage to 7 others. In exchange, they had inflicted more damage on the Vorak than the entire Council fleet combined. Thamrek contacted Sujin immediately, this time with genuine respect in his voice. How had they done it? What technology, what tactics, what secret had allowed them to fight so effectively? Sujin's answer was simple. The Council had thousands of years of military tradition, standard tactics that worked against standard enemies. But the Vorak weren't standard. They adapted to everything the Council did, because Council tactics were predictable. Humanity had no military tradition, no standard approach. Every human commander was encouraged to be creative, to try new things, to adapt faster than the enemy could respond. You fight like you always have, Sujin explained. We fight like we have to. That makes all the difference. Over the following weeks, the human task force pushed forward, working alongside Council fleets, but using completely different strategies. They taught Council commanders how to be unpredictable, how to adapt, how to fight an enemy that learned from every engagement. It wasn't easy. The Council military had spent millennia perfecting their approach, and changing it felt wrong. But they were desperate enough to try. The war turned slowly. With human help, the Council began winning battles. Planets were liberated. The Vorak advance stopped entirely, then reversed. It took 3 months of constant fighting, but eventually, the swarm was pushed back to the edge of Council space. The final engagement was different from all the others. HFY, the biologist who had once greeted a confused merchant at Haven Station, had been studying captured Vorak specimens. She discovered something remarkable. The Vorak weren't truly aggressive. They consumed because they needed resources to survive, like any species. But they had no understanding of negotiation, no concept of cooperation. In their collective mind, there were only the Vorak and resources to be consumed. HFY developed a virus, but not a weapon. It was a communication protocol, a way to introduce new concepts into the Vorak hive mind. Concepts like trade, cooperation, mutual benefit. It took weeks of careful work, but eventually she found a way to make the Vorak understand that they didn't need to consume everything. They could trade, exchange resources, coexist with other species. The Vorak, confronted with an entirely new way of thinking, did something that shocked everyone. They stopped fighting. Not because they were defeated, but because they genuinely wanted to try this new approach. They requested negotiations, using communication protocols they had learned from Hay-1's virus. The war ended not with extermination, but with peace. The Varak agreed to withdraw from occupied systems and establish formal relations with the Council. They would trade their unique abilities in materials processing and crystalline technology for resources they needed. They would become part of the galactic community rather than a threat to it. The Council reconvened in their orbital chamber, the same room where they had once dismissed humanity. But the mood was very different now. Vormok was gone, his health having finally failed during the crisis. The new chair was a younger Kelzan named Kirin, who had spent time studying human philosophy and history. She stood before the assembled species and did something the Council had never done before. She apologized. Formally, publicly, honestly. The Council had been wrong about humanity. Wrong about their capabilities, their potential, their worth. Wrong about what it meant to be a civilization. Then she turned to the human delegation, led by Ambassador Hyan Wu. He was old now, his hair completely white, his face lined with age. But his eyes were still sharp, still watching carefully as Kirin spoke. "Humanity saved us," Kirin said simply. "Not just from the Vorak, but from ourselves. We had become complacent, arrogant, convinced of our superiority. You showed us what we had forgotten, that wisdom comes from many sources, that strength takes many forms, that the newest voice in the room might have the most important thing to say. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally request that Earth consider rejoining our organization, this time as equal partners, with full representation and respect." The chamber waited for Hyan Wu's response. Many expected him to accept immediately. After all, hadn't Earth proven its point? Hadn't they shown that they deserved respect? Wasn't this the vindication they had been seeking? But Hyan Wu's answer surprised them. "I appreciate the apology, Chair Kirin. I believe it is sincere. But Earth has no interest in rejoining the Council." Shock rippled through the chamber. After everything, they were still refusing? Hyan Wu continued, his voice gentle but firm. "The Council only learned to respect us after we demonstrated military strength. That's not the foundation for a healthy relationship. You respected us because we could hurt you, because we proved useful in a crisis. That's not respect. That's fear dressed up in polite words. Real respect is given freely, based on dignity and inherent worth, not on power demonstrated through violence." He paused, letting his words settle. "However, Earth is willing to establish formal diplomatic relations. We will sign treaties, engage in trade, cooperate on mutual interests. The independent coalition will remain separate, providing an alternative for species who want a different kind of galactic community. We will be neighbors, allies, friends even, but not members." The chamber was silent. Then, slowly, Kirin nodded. She understood. The Council had to change, truly change, before humanity would consider joining. And that change would take time, perhaps generations. Hyan Wu's ship departed from Council space a week later. He sat in his quarters, looking out at the stars, thinking about the journey humanity had taken. Dismissed, insulted, underestimated. But they had stepped away with dignity intact, built something better in isolation, and returned not as supplicants, but as equals who chose compassion over revenge. The galaxy was bigger than anyone had imagined, with room for many different ways of living. The Council would continue on their path. Humanity would continue on theirs. And maybe, someday, those paths would converge into something neither could have built alone. But that was a story for another time. For now, it was enough that Earth had stepped away, and in doing so, had changed the galaxy forever.